Hi, I'm Kale, and welcome to the third episode of Crate Digging. And today's episode is Queen by Queen. This is a repressing from sometime from the early to mid 2000s. This is Queen's debut self-titled album from 1973. It's Freddie Mercury on vocals and piano, Brian May on guitar and vocals, John Deacon on bass, and Roger Taylor on drums and vocals. Produced by Roy Thomas Baker. For some reason, John Deacon is credited as Deacon John on this, and I don't know why. Before I get into the recording or the track-by-track breakdown, I'm just going to give you a history of the band Queen from their early period until this album was released. Now, the earliest history of the band Queen starts in 1968, when Brian May, Roger Taylor, and Tim Staffel start a band called Smile. This band consists of Brian May on guitar, Roger Taylor on drums, and Tim Staffel on bass and vocals. Smile sort of plays all around London and around London Imperial College. They shared bills with bands like the Jimi Hendrix Experience, the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, and Free, which ironically, Paul Rodgers, the lead singer of Free, would later become the stand-in lead singer after Freddie Mercury's death. As everyone just obviously knows, the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band was the house band on a weird British TV show for kids. I don't remember the name of it, and I don't really care. And they also are the band that plays Death Cab for Cutie in the Beatles Magical Mystery Tour club scene. The Hendrix Experience is the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Brian May was the main lyricist when Smile was a thing, and he actually, a majority of the songs that were written during the Smile days were later used in Queen songs, of which are on this album. Smile continued just kind of playing around Imperial College until 1970 when Tim Staffel decided to leave and start a folk rock band called Humpy Bong with the Bee Gees' former drummer Colin Peterson. And this left Brian and Roger in a bit of a pickle until they remembered Tim Staffel's old friend. Tim's old friend was, of course, Freddie Bulsara, who decided to join the band as the lead singer. Freddie didn't really like the name Smile, so he just kind of, dug real deep in the inner Brit in him and called the band Queen. He also designed this little seal for the band, which was used in a lot of their press stuff and albums. Throughout the next year, they cycled through just a lot of different bassists, basically just college kids that went to Imperial College that happened to play bass, until early 1971 when they stumble across 19-year-old John Deacon, who just kind of sticks. The band records a few demos in 1971 and decides to record a full album in 1972, and it is released in 1973, and that is Queen. Let's get into the recording of Queen. In mid-1971, they recorded many demos, including one song that stuck on the album. And after another year of just playing shows, they decided to why don't we just record an album? And during the early recording of this album, Freddie Bulsara decides to just change his name to Freddie Mercury because it sounds cool. Tracks are recorded through mostly just the summer of 1972 and produced by Wall of Sound producer Roy Thomas Baker. Not a whole lot is known about the recording of this album other than the fact that it was in fact recorded during the summer and fall of 1972 at Trident Studios in London. The whole genre of the album is quite confusing. The best I could describe it is prog metal with mystical, folky elements. Pretty Led Zeppelin-esque. In fact, when the album was initially released, they were slammed for being a Led Zeppelin clone. But anyway, let's get into the track-by-track breakdown. Kicking off side one, we have Keep Yourself Alive. Keep Yourself Alive was that one song that was recorded with all the demos in 1971. It was written by Brian May in late 1969 when Tim Staffel was still with Smile. It was released as Queen's first single backed with Son and Daughter, which is also on this album. This song, at least in my opinion, sounds a lot like what Queen would sound like in the coming years than anything else on this album. One of their most played songs in live shows, also arguably the most famous song on this album. Number 2 is Doing All Right, which is a straight-up Smile song written by Tim Staffel and Brian May in 1968, the first year they were formed. It was kind of a Smile standard. They kind of performed it at every show. It was kind of like what Smile was known for. It was a demo recording from 1969 of Tim Staffel on vocals and then Brian May on guitar and Roger Taylor on drums, which is somewhere out there on YouTube. It starts out as this kind of slow, like, a soft pop, sort of, and then, like, there's this break and there's just this really loud, booming Jimmy Page, like, Pete Townsend-esque guitar in it, and it's very confusing, but it's also very good. My favorite songs on the album. Great King Rat. It's okay. A big old prog fest. Or Macho Genesis. That doesn't even make sense, but now My Fairy King, which is the next track, however, is also one of my favorite tracks on the album. This is just gonna be a recurring theme on the show. That's just how it is. At least 5 songs are gonna be my favorite song on the album. Now this is the first Queen song where we get to hear Roger Taylor's falsetto, which is later heavily used in Bohemian Rhapsody. More on Roger Taylor. The drumming in the first half of the song is fantastic. It like imitates this like a horse like galloping, and it's very cool. It's also the first Queen song to demonstrate Freddie Mercury's piano skills. The piano on Doing All Right was with Brian May. Also the first Queen song to mention Rye, which is a fantasy world Freddie Mercury created that will later heavily appear in the song 7 Seas of Rye, if you can believe it. It's on Queen 2, sort of. I don't know, we'll get to what it's on later. Okay, moving on to side 2. Opening side 2, we have Liar. I hate to say it because I know it's so popular, but Liar is a bit underwhelming. The live versions are pulled off far better than the studio version. There's more energy in the live versions. Speaking of, Liar was played at almost every single Queen concert. One of Queen's standards. Next is The Night Comes Down. The Night Comes Down was actually one of the first Queen songs written with the band Queen by Brian May, by the way. Again, this could be just me, but this song is very Beatle-esque. Other elements of like prog and prog metal. It seems like something that would be on the White Album. Could just be me, but I don't know. Next we have Modern Times Rock and Roll. Modern Times Rock and Roll is wild. Written and sung by Roger Taylor, so when you see that, you know it's just gonna be, you know you're in for a ride. It's just goofy. Like, the guitar riff on the song is immaculate. Like, one of the best on the whole album. But the rest of the song is just Roger Taylor being like, metal music is so cool. And there's this one part at the very end where I don't know who says it, but someone just says in a cowboy voice, "Look out." And it's one of the best moments ever. Just ever. And now that I'm done fiending over Modern Times Rock and Roll, we have Son and Daughter. Son and Daughter was one of the first songs also written with Queen, and it was played at their very first show as Queen. And the original live version that they played up until they recorded the album had a famous Brian May guitar solo, but that guitar solo was actually never properly recorded because it wasn't on the album version until they recorded Brighton Rock for their 1974 album Sheer Heart Attack, where they used this solo and put it in Brighton Rock. Now the next song is Jesus, which is literally just Jesus Christ Superstar, but prog. It's literally just the story of Jesus of Nazareth, but like if King Crimson did it. A special little song. Closing out the album, we have 7 Seas of Rye, ... Like I said earlier, the song 7 Seas of Rye was intended for this album, but it wasn't finished, and then it ended up being put on their second album, Queen 2. Now, to cope with their disappointment, they just put a teaser to the song at the very end of their album called 7 Seas of Rye, ... And it's just the instrumental intro to 7 Seas of Rye, like a little less toned down. I'm not gonna get into 7 Seas of Rye because I might do a video on Queen 2 someday, and then I just do it then. But anyway, let's get into my thoughts. is actually one of my favorite Queen albums. The first 4 Queen albums are essentially flawless. Not flawless, but they're the best albums out of their discography. I'm really not a huge fan of late 70s and then 80s Queen. I think Innuendo, however, their last album, is also one of their best albums. The last album with Freddie Mercury. But out of all Queen albums, this is my second favorite. My first favorite, ironically, being Queen 2, and my third favorite being Night at the Opera, and my fourth being Sheer Heart Attack, and my fifth being Innuendo. Though, looking at then Queen 10 years later, it really does show some wild evolution. Like, this album is like if Genesis and King Crimson had, like, a deformed baby, and then, like, what was an album released 10 years later? Well, there's Hot Space and The Works, which are both known as, like, your quintessential 80s synth pop albums, which is wild to me, because, like, this is as prog gets. Even just what they were doing, like, 2 years later on Night at the Opera. They still have their prog roots, but they're, like, putting in art rock and opera rock into it, and also inventing opera rock. Rock opera, but opera rock. It's even so different from what they were doing a year later. Sure, Brighton Rock is still pretty prog punky and prog metally, but that's when they started to get their, like, glam. This is when they were in their glam rock era. They were just on their Gary Glitter. All in all, it's a great Queen album. Listen to it. Anyway, that's it for today's episode. But yeah. Goodbye, bozos.